Have you ever stopped to think why, despite living in the most prosperous and connected era in human history, so many people feel profoundly empty inside? Why? Surrounded by infinite possibilities for entertainment, information, and connection, do we experience record levels of anxiety, depression, and a persistent sense that something fundamental is missing? I'm not talking about abstract statistics or distant social trends. I'm talking about that feeling you might recognize in the silence of the early morning hours, when distractions cease, and you wonder if you're truly living or just existing. This restlessness isn't a personal flaw of yours, nor an individual weakness. It's the symptom of something much deeper happening to our species. We are witnessing the systematic erosion of what we might call the soul of human society. For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors lived in small communities where each person intimately knew their place in the world. Their lives were woven into a dense network of meaningful relationships, shared rituals, and collective narratives that gave meaning not just to individual existence, but to the human experience as a whole. The Paleolithic hunter who set out on an expedition knew exactly why he was doing it, for whom he was doing it, and how his action connected with the larger cosmos around him. His identity wasn't a fragile individual construction that needed to be constantly reaffirmed through likes and external validation. It was something solid, rooted in thousands of years of tradition and belonging. This solidity began to fragment about 12,000 years ago with the agricultural revolution, but the process accelerated dramatically in recent centuries. The Industrial Revolution tore millions of people from their traditional rural communities and deposited them in cities where they became anonymous cogs in giant productive machines. But even this transformation maintained certain elements that nourished the human soul. Work had a clear and visible purpose. Families remained united by economic necessity, and organized religions still offered structures of meaning for most people. What we're experiencing now is fundamentally different. It's the first time in history that an entire generation of human beings is growing up without deep connections to stable communities, without convincing collective narratives about the meaning of life, and without meaningful rituals that mark life's important passages. We've replaced deep human bonds with superficial digital connections. We've traded transcendent narratives for infinite entertainment. We've abandoned rites of passage for consumption milestones. And the result is a silent epidemic of existential emptiness that no amount of antidepressants or meditation apps can completely cure. Consider for a moment the nature of modern social life. How many people do you really know? I'm not talking about knowing names or faces, but knowing deeply in such a way that their joys and pains genuinely matter to you and vice versa. For our hunter-gatherer ancestors, this number hovered around 150 people, the famous Dunbar's number that represents the cognitive limit for stable social relationships. Today, paradoxically, many people live in cities with millions of inhabitants, but have difficulty naming 5 people they could count on in a real crisis. We're surrounded by humanity, but deeply isolated, digitally connected but emotionally disconnected. This disconnection isn't just a matter of individual well-being, it's eroding the very foundations of society itself. Healthy communities depend on people who care about each other, who share collective responsibilities, and who have vested interest in the common good. When these bonds dissolve, what remains is a collection of atomized individuals, each struggling to maximize their own short-term interests, unable to cooperate to solve problems that affect everyone. Digital technology, which promised to connect us like never before, has ended up becoming one of the main forces behind this atomization. Social media gives us the illusion of connection while actually keeping us isolated in our own feedback bubbles. We spend hours daily consuming the carefully curated lives of people we barely know, comparing our messy realities with the polished fantasies others project online. The result is a constant sense of inadequacy, as if everyone else has figured out the secret to a fulfilling life while we're left behind. Worse still, the attention economy that feeds these platforms is explicitly designed to keep our brains in a state of constant agitation. Every notification, every infinite scroll, every variable reward system has been calibrated by teams of neuroscientists and behavioral psychologists to keep our attention fragmented and our nervous system on permanent alert. It's no coincidence that anxiety and attention deficit rates have exploded at the same time smartphones became ubiquitous. We're literally reprogramming our brains to be incapable of the deep contemplation and genuine connection that nourish the human soul. But technology is just one of the forces at play. The other major corrosion comes from what we might call the ideology of extreme individualism. In recent decades, we've been bombarded with messages telling us that we are totally responsible for our own destiny, that we should follow our dreams regardless of the consequences for others, and that any form of obligation or commitment to communities is a limitation on our personal authenticity. This mentality, while it may seem liberating on the surface, actually deprives us of one of the deepest sources of human meaning, the sense that we are part of something larger than ourselves. When everything becomes a matter of individual choice, paradoxically, nothing seems really important. If I can change careers, relationships, cities, or identities whenever I want, then none of these choices carries the existential weight necessary to generate deep meaning. Commitment, constancy, and even limitation are essential ingredients for a life rich in meaning, but our culture portrays them as traps to be avoided. This mentality also extends to our relationship with work. Most people today work in jobs that, honestly, they can't really explain what they do or why it matters. David Graeber called many of these jobs bullshit jobs, positions that seem to exist more to keep people busy than to create real value in the world. When you spend 40 or 50 hours a week doing something you feel is fundamentally useless, it corrodes your sense of purpose and dignity in a way that no amount of weekend leisure can compensate for. Meanwhile, consumerism has become our primary form of identity, expression, and pursuit of happiness. We're constantly bombarded with messages telling us that the next purchase, the next upgrade, the next experience will finally bring us the satisfaction we seek. But consumerism is by design insatiable. It needs to keep us eternally dissatisfied, to continue functioning. Genuine, lasting happiness would be catastrophic for an economy based on infinite growth of consumption. So we create entire generations of people who confuse temporary pleasure with lasting joy, who believe they can buy their identity in stores, and who measure their self-worth by the amount of things they own or experiences they collect. But identity cannot be bought, only developed through deep relationships and meaningful contributions to something greater than ourselves. Organized religion, for all its problems and limitations, at least offered stable structures of meaning and community. Even when people didn't literally believe all the doctrines, religious rituals marked life's passages, created regular occasions for deep reflection, and reminded people that they were part of a story much larger than their own individual lives. As these structures weaken, nothing emerges to replace them. We have no secular equivalents to rituals for birth, adolescence, marriage, aging, and death. We have no regular occasions for collective contemplation of the fundamental mysteries of existence. The result is that we drift through life without clear landmarks, without collective narratives, and without a sense of transcendent purpose. Each person is forced to invent their own philosophy of life from scratch, an impossible task that leaves most people feeling lost and overwhelmed. It's no surprise that so many people turn to extreme political ideologies, conspiracy theories, or self-help gurus in a desperate search for some structure of meaning, no matter how toxic or illusory it might be. I need to stop for a moment and ask directly, do you feel this emptiness I'm talking about? This sense that you're playing a role in a play whose script nobody explained properly? That you're running on a treadmill, always busy, but rarely accomplishing something that feels truly important? I know many of us keep these feelings to ourselves, perhaps afraid to admit that despite all our achievements and possessions, we still feel something essential is missing. But you're not alone in this. If this emptiness resonates with your experience, share in the comments. I feel this emptiness when I realize that your honesty can help others see that they're not alone in this silent struggle so many of us face. But recognizing the problem is just the first step. The harder question is, what can we do about it? How can we rebuild the structures of meaning and community that our species needs to thrive? We can't simply go back to the past. Times have changed irreversibly. But we can learn from what worked in traditional societies and adapt those principles to our contemporary reality. First, we need to rediscover the art of building deep and lasting relationships. This means going beyond the superficial interactions that dominate our social life and creating spaces for vulnerability, intimacy, and mutual commitment. It means choosing quality over quantity in our friendships, investing regular time in specific people, and accepting that meaningful relationships require work, patience, and sometimes even productive conflict. Second, we need to find ways to contribute to something larger than ourselves. This doesn't have to be grandiose or revolutionary. It can be as simple as genuinely engaging with your local community, developing skills that benefit others, or dedicating part of your time to a cause you truly believe in. The important thing is to move away from exclusive focus on the self and reconnect with the fact that we are social creatures whose happiness depends on collective well-being. Third, we need to create new rituals and practices that mark life's important passages and connect us with larger mysteries. These don't need to be religious in the traditional sense, but they must have enough depth to pull us out of the constant flow of distractions and put us in touch with fundamental questions about meaning, mortality, and our place in the cosmos. Fourth, we need to be much more intentional about our relationship with technology. This means establishing clear boundaries about when and how we use digital devices, creating screen-free spaces in our homes and lives, and consciously choosing activities that nurture our capacity for deep attention and genuine presence. Fifth, we need to rethink our relationship with work. This might mean seeking careers that have clear positive impact on the world, or finding ways to bring more meaning to whatever work we do. It also means resisting the toxic productivity culture that tells us we should be constantly busy and optimizing our performance. Sixth, we need to cultivate regular contemplative practices, whether meditation, nature walks, reflective writing, or any other activity that allows us to process our experience at a deeper level. Our culture is addicted to constant stimulation, and recovering the capacity for silence and introspection is essential for reconnecting with our inner lives. The truth is that the forces corroding the soul of modern society are powerful and well established. They are sustained by enormous economic interests and by social systems that benefit from our fragmentation and constant dissatisfaction. Changing this requires not just individual effort, but also collective action to create social structures that support genuine human flourishing rather than simply maximum economic growth. We need policies that prioritize community well-being over maximum economic efficiency. We need technologies designed to amplify our humanity rather than exploit it. We need cultural narratives that celebrate connection, contribution, and contemplation as much as they celebrate individual achievement and material accumulation. This might seem like an impossible task, but it's worth remembering that current conditions are neither natural nor inevitable. They are the result of specific choices made by specific societies at specific moments in history, and if they were created by human choices, they can be changed by different human choices. The first civilization in history that has sufficient material resources to end extreme poverty, sufficient knowledge to cure most diseases, and sufficient technology to connect all of humanity, can also choose to use these capabilities to nurture complete human flourishing. We can choose to create societies that not only keep our bodies alive and comfortable, but that also feed our souls. But this requires that we recognize something is deeply wrong with our current situation. It requires that we stop pretending that chronic anxiety, widespread depression, and existential emptiness are just the natural price of modern progress. It requires that we admit that a truly advanced society would be one that produces flourishing human beings, not just efficient consumers. And it requires that each of us make different choices in our own lives, starting today. Because while larger structures matter, the soul of society is ultimately made up of the individual souls that compose it. And every time we choose real connection over digital entertainment, every time we prioritize relationships over acquisitions, every time we seek meaningful contribution over superficial success, we're doing our part to heal not just our own lives, but the collective life of our species. The journey to rebuild society's soul begins with the journey to rebuild our own soul. And this journey, however challenging, may be the most important and rewarding adventure we undertake. Because on the other side of this journey lies not just individual happiness, but the possibility of a civilization that truly deserves the name advanced. If these reflections have touched something you've been feeling, but perhaps haven't found words to express, know that you're not alone. By subscribing to this channel, you'll connect with a growing community of people who share your concerns and your desire for a deeper understanding of the existential challenges of our time. Each week, we meet here to explore together the big questions that define our era and to seek not just understanding, but also wiser ways to live amid the transformations we're witnessing. This isn't just a channel, but a space for dialogue and collective growth where we can honestly examine what it means to be human in the 21st century and how we can together create an existence richer in meaning and connection. Subscribe so we can continue this essential conversation about how to live with more wisdom and purpose in a world that often leaves us disoriented and disconnected from our own deepest humanity. Should AIs have the ability to open a bank account and manage a bank account? That's a very practical question. We are very close to the point when you can tell an AI, go out there, make money. Your goal is to make $1 billion. And one of the things about money, it's a very easy goal to define. An AI can make money in many ways. It can hire its services to people to write their essays or books or whatever, many things it can do. It can earn money. It can then invest this money in the stock exchange. So do we as a society want to allow AI agents to open bank accounts and manage them in any way they see fit? And then this is not a question for 50 years. This is a question for 5 years, maybe 1 year. If you think about all the debate about abortion, without going into the debate itself, the people who think, rightly or wrongly, but they think that abortion is murder, they have a very strong incentive to build a surveillance system for American women, to stop murder. Mm-hmm. Like, you can build this surveillance system that can identify, yesterday you're pregnant, today you are not, what happened in between? So it's not just a problem, for Iran or for the Palestinians or the Chinese. This can come to the US as well.
And to prevent them from crossing state lines, things like that.
Yeah. Like, okay, you went from, Texas to California, you were pregnant, you came back, you're not pregnant. What happened in California?
Or if you thought someone was eating the dogs and the cats and the pets, like
That's the third kind of information. That's the intersubjective. So you have objective,
yes.
You have subjective, then you have the intersubjective.
Okay, what's
the intersubjective realm? This is things that exist in the communication network between people. Mm-hmm. So this is where you find the image of Jesus, and this is where you find the US dollar, and this is where you find the people eating dogs and cats.
Right.
It's something that is not objectively true, but it's not just the fantasy of a single individual or the feeling, only I feel it. It's in the communication, in the information network between all of us, or some of us, if enough people believe it, if enough people talk about it, it connects. Again, even if we continue with these dogs and cats, you know, you had maybe the most important conversation in the world meant to help the citizens of the United States decide who would control the nuclear weapons that could destroy the world.
Exactly.
And the only thing that most people remember from this hour of debate was the dogs and cats.
Welcome to America.